Hey everybody, welcome back to Bible Fun with Duns. Today we read Leviticus chapter 12 and 13, so let's get started.
Okay, so in these chapters, you have got a pretty unique broad scope of Israelite society, right? So in chapter 12, it's all about childbirth. In chapter 13, it's all about leprosy. Now, if I could tie these chapters together, I'm going to tell you the word that if you haven't read yet, you need to be looking for. And if you've already read, I want you to reflect back on how often you had to read this word today. Ready? It's the words clean and unclean. Now, this is going to have, in both chapters, this is going to have both a probably like a practical effect and then also probably a spiritual effect. So, in with most of these like regulations in Leviticus, there are levels at which, as you keep digging down, what you're going to find is that there's wonderful spiritual like symbolism in a lot of this. But you're also going to find the practical effects of, imagine a society like Israel, roughly 2 million people living in the wilderness on their way to the promised land, living in very tight quarters. What if something like the plague breaks out? If it breaks out a little bit, it's going to break out a lot because they are living on top of one another, traveling throughout the wilderness. So the practical side of this is that a lot of these laws come back to the fact that these people need to be hygienically clean. Now, let me give you a couple of like takeaways from this. So in chapter 12, it's about childbirth. So if a woman gives birth to a child and he's a boy, then she is ritually unclean for 8 days, and then she's got to like purify for 33 days. If she has a baby girl, all of those times are basically doubled. Now, a lot of times you're going to say, well, does that mean that having a child makes somebody unclean? The answer there is no. So the reason we know that is because in Genesis, God told his people, he said, go be fruitful and multiply. He also tells us on several occasions throughout scripture that childhood, motherhood, parenting, children are a heritage. They're a gift from the Lord. So having a child does not make you sinful. It does not make you dirty. Here's the kicker as to why this matters. Because when the child is born, there's blood involved, right? So all of these laws have some form of like physical blood, or in the case of leprosy in the next chapter, this kind of like exposure of the skin. And what this is saying is, basically, he says you're not sinfully unclean. This is physical, okay? This is about, hey, if you've just given birth, let's not be high-fiving and shaking hands. Like, this is a way to teach people that there is a way by which we are clean and unclean, not only spiritually, but physically. This is good hygiene practice. A lot of the questions I get on chapter 12 is, why is it double for the amount of girls? Like, why is the mom able to get out of jail free, basically, and go to the give an offering after 8 days with a boy, but she's got to wait a long time for the girl? It's not that girls are of lesser value. It's nothing that nefarious, right? It's practical. So if your son has been born, and on the 8th day, the child is supposed to be circumcised. Well, who does that? The priest. By the way, I'm reading through this thinking, thank the Lord I'm a preacher and not an Old Testament priest. Because like in the Old Testament, they're performing the circumcisions. And in chapter 13, that's chapter 12. And in chapter 13, they're like traveling doctors that are basically doubling as dermatologists, and they're like looking at people's rashes and stuff. I'm gonna be honest with you.
You've made us bleed clipping our fingernails as babies too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I did clip his fingernail one time as a baby and nick some skin, and he cried. And thank you for reminding us. But I'm just saying, I don't want to see everybody's rashes. So again, I'm grateful for the new covenant. All right. The other side of that is all of this kind of ties into the fact that there's a deeply spiritual undertone of all of this as well. So the mother, if she's bringing her child to be circumcised, or if the child has to be brought to the priest after 8 days to be circumcised, if the mom has to keep the requirement the same as she was for girls for an important moment in the little boy's life, the mom's going to want to be there. Well, what if this is not practical to say, hey, you get out early on this occasion for us, son, you'll get so that you can attend this event. This is a religious ceremony. Could be. Now, rashes in chapter 13, a little bit different. Now, think about it like this. In the Bible, leprosy is kind of symbolic of sin. And here's listen, like sin, leprosy spreads, it festers, it's deeper than it appears, and it gets worse over time, and it is infectious, which is why people had to kind of get by themselves, and they're running off and living by themselves and screaming unclean, unclean whenever somebody came near. Listen, sin also spreads. You give it an inch, it'll take a mile. It festers. It always gets worse. It doesn't just get better naturally. It gets worse. It's infectious. If I teach you to do something and you follow in my step, that's infection. Sin like leprosy. Leprosy left unchecked will kill you. So will sin. And so you have those parallels. You also have to understand when chapter 13 is talking about being leprous, it's not just talking about what we would call like Hansen's disease. That's what we would call leprosy, where like body parts are falling off. That kind of leprosy. They would use the word leprosy the way we would use the word cancer. We can say somebody has cancer, but listen, we all recognize there are various types of cancer. So leprosy is a generic term for a ton of skin disorders. Some of them are just like psoriasis, some is acne, some is like literally leprosy. So it's a broad spectrum. There's a few things I like on this. I do like, oddly enough, at this phase of my life, I do like this little last phrase in 13 where it's like, oh, he's not leprous, he's just bald. Let him live his life. And so that's even repeated a couple of times, like a knife digging in. Oh, he's not leprous, he's just bald. And so that's what's happening. But you also kind of have this idea, the key to leprosy was always to determine, like you set them aside to examine their lives to see if the problem was deeper than surface level. You do that with sin too. Charles Spurgeon said that every person by nature is like a leper. He is incapable of fellowship with God's people and is shut out utterly and entirely by his sin from the presence and acceptance of God. And so you've got all of these laws here in a way where now grace comes in, because Tony Evans is going to say that God made a way for even those who once thought themselves to be hopelessly unclean in their leprosy to find physical restoration. And that's the picture of what God can do for us spiritually too. Well, listen, how did these people get reintroduced? How are they declared clean and allowed back in? The priest said so. Hebrews says that who is our high priest? Jesus. Who declares us clean? Jesus. When our sin is infectious and festering and growing and all this kind of stuff, and it goes deeper than skin level, who's the only priest that can declare us clean? Jesus. That's where it comes in. All right. Jax, what was your takeaway on this?
Okay. So reading through this, turns out there's actually so much meaning to all of it, right? And so it can be really easy to just go through and think a lot of this doesn't apply to us, or a lot of this just seems like a bunch of random numbers, right? And so specifically, what I'm about to talk about right here is the circumcision of the male children, right? It said to do that.
Let's just go. Things we never thought we would video or say on a video. Jax, talk about circumcision.
We're doing it.
Okay.
So it says after 8 days, that's when you need to do it, right? And so we're going to come back to that in a second. But there's this idea, and it's really like just I don't know. It's the way people have painted the world now. But it's this idea of science against Christianity or religion in general, right? And so this is something we talked about this past week in a book club we do. And the chapter discussed science versus Christianity, right? And so the whole deal is there's like those two don't contradict each other as much as a lot of the world want us to believe, right? So science is something that kind of gives us a basis to observe like what's happening in the world, and it gives us that basis to observe God's creation, really. And so it's interesting reading this because it's just so ahead of its time, right? And so the reason that it says not to circumcise the babies until after 8 days is because, and I learned this from my science teacher, Mr. Merrill. He's like the GOAT.
Goat means greatest of all time. He's not calling him livestock. Just for reference.
He's not an animal.
Okay. All right.
But anyway, the reason for that is because like if you do that as soon as the baby's born, then it's going to bleed out. But the baby needs that time to develop like the necessary blood clot and kind of get that ability in it so that it's able to actually stop the bleeding. And so this isn't something they knew, but it's something they followed, and it's something that their creator told them. So it's just so cool how thousands of years before we even knew anything about blood, really, the Bible already has these conclusions drawn out for us. And so it goes like that for circumcision, but also we're talking about cleanliness. Like this whole thing, like cleanliness is not something that was super. It wasn't super important back in the day, right? And so that's why you had so many of these plagues going around, like the Black Death and the flu, like all of these things that are killing tons of people. It's because they lived in a society that was super unclean. And so hygiene is an idea that's kind of foreign to them. But this is something that's introduced through the Bible and from God, our creator. And so I just think it's so cool to see the Bible so ahead of its time in including all these details.
I think you can sum it up by saying chapters 12 and 13 are an attempt by the great physician to speak to the hygiene and the medical issues of his people. That's what's happening. It's got a practical meaning and a spiritual meaning, and we just kind of keep rolling through it. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.